So I'm looking at the the Presidential Records Act for the first time in my life. Jeez, the PRA, Presidential Records Act of 1978. And what do I think? It gets really complicated once you click on this here and you start to look at some other stuff. And you're like, oh my God, you start to look at things like other NARA statutes. What is NARA? National Archives and Records Administration. NARA is the National Archives and Records Administration. So once you start to look at, for example, some of these other statutes like concealment removal, you have something called the Former President's Act. You have something called the dissemination of information within the United States, concealment. Boy, they have everything really sort of like, you know, ironed out. And so, what do I think? Now that I haven't read them in depth, obviously, I don't really have the time. I'm not being paid the big bucks. But what do I think about the Presidential Records Act? How does this help Donald Trump, the defendant Trump, if at all? I would say that, what is it? The PRA establishes public ownership of all presidential records and defines the term presidential record. So right away, the public owns the records. Okay. Requires that vice president. Okay, we don't need that. Places the responsibility for the custody and management of incumbent presidential records with the president. That helps us. I think. The Presidential Records Act places the responsibility for the custody and management of incumbent presidential records with the president. The PRA requires that the president and his staff take all practical steps to file personal records separately from presidential records. So when you say Trump was helping with the box and packing up the boxes, I mean, we just go here, right? This helps us, right? Allows the incumbent president to dispose of records that no longer have administrative, historical, informational, or evidentiary value once the views of the archivist or archivist, however you want, of the United States on the proposed disposal have been obtained in writing. Okay, so this doesn't help us because I don't think he sought any views in writing from the archivist of the United States. But I don't think that's an issue that is in play because nobody said, oh, he wanted to dispose of records. I mean, he did discuss disposing of records according to certain audio tapes that were played on the news media recently, but I'm really not sure. Context matters, so I don't know what was said before that or after that, and who was he speaking with, and what preceded that, what discussions were had with the Archives Department of the United States. I think all of that is relevant before I can say, well, he did seek in writing to have something in writing or he did not. I mean, based only on the audio tapes, it sounds like maybe he did not seek that, which could be problematic, obviously. Establishes in law that any incumbent presidential records, whether textual or electronic, held on courtesy storage by the archivist, remain in the exclusive legal custody of the president, and that any request or order for access to such records must be made to the president, not NARA. That's interesting too. I mean, I don't think the records in play in this particular lawsuit were being held on courtesy storage by archivists, but it does have some language that I think helps Trump to make his argument that he had a right to have these records in Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it's I don't know how strong the case would be or how strong the argument would be. I think it will really come down to how skillful his lawyers are in taking the law as it is and applying it to the facts as they are, you see. Um, and these guys working with him, I mean, notwithstanding what I may have said in the past, I mean, obviously they are very, very skilled, intelligent lawyers who, they're not amateurs, okay? They're not amateurs, okay? And so they know what they're doing. But it seems to me that um, there might be something in the Presidential Records Act that might not be totally devastating for the president. I mean, let's read on. Establishes a process by which the president may restrict and the public may obtain access to these records after the president leaves office. Again, I think this has some wiggle room here. Specifically, the PRA allows for public access to presidential records through the freedom of, okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Codifies the process by which former and incumbent presidents conduct reviews for executive privilege prior to public release of records by NARA. Okay. So, okay. Former and incumbent presidents. Okay, so these, okay. All right, so what do I think? I think establishes procedures for Congress, courts, and subsequent administrations to obtain special access to records from NARA that remain closed to the public following a privileged review period by the former and incumbent presidents. Okay. Establishes preservation requirements for official business conducted using non-official electronic messaging accounts. Any individual creating presidential records must not use non-official electronic messaging accounts unless that individual copies an official account as the message is created. Oh my God, it's just so much. Prevents an individual who has been convicted of a crime related to the review, retention, removal, or destruction of records from being given access to any original records. Okay, so, I think one of the important things that this particular act suggests is that, this idea, I think what I heard in the media is like I hear 20 years imprisonment for, retention of the records. I don't know if that is supported by the act itself, of the wording of what I just read. But where is actually the actual I'm not even sure, because if that's all there is to it, I'm not really sure that I'm convinced that this is a slam dunk case for the DOJ. I mean, clearly, there were some improprieties here on the part of Donald Trump, or President Trump, if you will. I mean, if I'm his lawyer, it's President Trump. If I'm a blogger, a YouTuber, it's whatever I choose to say at that given moment in time. And for me, clearly there were some improprieties, right? Maybe big ones, maybe ones that were so big that he should be fined, and he should be disqualified from holding public office again. But I don't see a case here that warrants imprisonment of this individual. And but it would be interesting to hear how the DOJ puts forward its case and how Trump's lawyers argue the case, because certainly the Presidential Records Act, if anything, I think it helps the president, honestly. Right? I think it helps the president. I don't think it hurts the president. Definition, ownership, presidential records. Um, Definition. I don't. How much time? This is too long. Documented term presidential records mean documentary materials of any reasonably segregable portion thereof, created or received by the president, the president's immediate staff. Um, Created or received by the president. Okay, created or received. That's important. Look, again, I would have to go through this like maybe in a different video, but I don't think what I've read so far suggests that the Department of Justice has a slam dunk case against the former president, if you will, Donald Trump. But let's see. I mean, I'm an amateur over here. What do I know? What do I know?